The climax of Homer's Odyssey presents a clean, triumphant resolution. Odysseus kills the suitors, reunites with his wife, and reclaims his throne. But this pristine ending conceals a violent, highly unstable reality. In the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, the Alexandrian scholars Aristarchus and Aristophanes argued that the epic we read today is actually too long. They believed the true poem concluded near the end of Book 23. This timeline illustrates the 24 books of the Odyssey. The Alexandrian critics pointed specifically to Book 23, line 296, the exact moment Odysseus and Penelope go to bed. By terminating the text here, they effectively amputated the final 600 lines of the epic. This ancient editorial decision exposes the mechanical fragility of the hero's homecoming. It forces an examination of the exact point where a wandering king successfully resecures his political, familial, and cosmic domains. Determining the structural endpoint of the poem requires us to define what actually constitutes a legitimate, complete return. Penelope's marital bed serves as the ultimate cosmological proof of identity required to validate her husband's return. Odysseus built his marital chamber directly around a living olive tree, utilizing it as a bedpost. This tree acts as an axis mundi, pinning the household to the earth and aligning the family with the divine order. We can measure the organic stability of this bed by contrasting it with the metallic, inanimate net forged by Hephaestus in Book 8. Hephaestus used a mechanical trap to ensnare his wife Aphrodite and her lover Ares. That net represents a stagnant marriage built entirely on deceit, surface beauty, and retribution. Odysseus's bed is the exact opposite. It remains a living, immovable center, protected by divine law and private intimacy, guarded for 20 years. Ending the epic exactly at this intimate reunion offers perfect structural symmetry. The narrative arc of the wandering hero concludes the moment he returns to his physical center. Here, the wanderer is geographically and cosmically rooted. He has achieved the ultimate peaceful nostos. If the Odyssey functions purely as a cosmological romance, the Alexandrian critics were right. The story logically stops in the bedroom. Reclaiming the bedroom holds no weight if Odysseus cannot reclaim the state from the usurping suitors occupying his halls. The trial of the bow operates as a recognized folktale motif. It requires a returning king to perform a physically impossible feat to prove his superiority. The text describing the required archery shot relies on ambiguous physics. Homer uses the contested Greek word steleie to describe the axes the arrow must pass through. Scholars debate whether the arrow pierces solid iron axe heads or threads through a perfectly aligned series of handle sockets. This maps the trajectory of the latter interpretation. The shot requires punishing geometry, demanding the arrow pass cleanly through 12 consecutive empty sockets. The mechanics matter less than the symbolic performance, enacted in front of the men stealing his kingdom. This is an epiphany of metis, cunning and calculation. The strategy completely replaces the necessity of brute physical force. Only a legitimate ruler commands this geometry, perfectly balancing physical tension, timing, and intellectual superiority over his younger rivals. The bow validates Odysseus's political supremacy through a feat no other man in Ithaca can replicate. By asserting this absolute dominance, he restores his status as king, but establishes a rigid hierarchy that relies entirely on his personal, violent superiority to maintain. A fatal flaw disrupts this victory. Odysseus returns to Ithaca and finds his heir, Telemachus, has already come of age. We expect a harmonious father-son alliance. Instead, Odysseus approaches his household in a deeply paranoid psychological state. During an earlier beggar sequence, we see a shocking rhetorical mirroring between Odysseus and the cruelest suitor, Antinous. Odysseus adopts the exact speech patterns of his enemy. By mimicking the suitors, he actively isolates Telemachus, rhetorically and emotionally cutting him out of the alliance. This tension escalates in Book 21, when Telemachus attempts to string the great bow himself. On his 4th try, the son nearly succeeds. He generates immense kinetic energy to string the weapon, coming dangerously close to usurping the true king. Odysseus stops him with a chilling, specific action. From across the room, he delivers a single, silent nod of dissent. With this silent gesture, Odysseus halts his son's heroic advancement to prioritize his own absolute authority. Odysseus perceives his son not as a loyal ally, but as a latent threat to his absolute narrative control. We can view this clearly by looking at Virgil's Aeneid. There, divine intervention holds the young Ascanius back to preserve his destiny, rather than a threatened, competitive father. Odysseus violently refuses to share the heroic crown. His homecoming operates as a hostile, paranoid takeover of his own family. If the psychological reality on Ithaca is this toxic, we must reevaluate the highly controversial events of Book 24. The Alexandrian critics had a point. As this timeline shows, the final book is flooded with extreme linguistic anomalies and untraditional poetic forms. Despite these post-migration linguistic errors, the epic's narrative architecture desperately requires these final chapters to function. The poem must logically resolve the hanging threads of Laertes' grief and the unavenged families of the slaughtered suitors. This culminates in a final, chaotic battle on Ithaca. Unlike the earlier slaughter in the palace, this fight lacks a clean, divine mandate and precise execution. When a ceasefire is called, Telemachus shows dignified restraint. Odysseus responds with wildly unhinged behavior, actively ignoring the goddess Athena's commands to stop fighting. His final action in the epic is an inarticulate, violent scream as he charges the fleeing, defeated families of his own citizens. The silver-tongued hero ends his 20-year journey completely without speech, consumed by paranoia and a total lack of self-restraint. Book 24 is aesthetically messy and linguistically broken because it accurately reflects a nostos that is permanently shattered. The Alexandrian critics craved the idealized cosmic resolution of the marital bed. To achieve it, they purposefully ignored the political and psychological fallout documented in the final text. The true ending of the Odyssey is a fragile, forced ceasefire. It leaves Odysseus dominant, but profoundly alienated from his kingdom and his bloodline. This exact paranoia is realized in the ancient sequel, the Telegony. In that poem, Odysseus is ironically killed in a misunderstanding by his own illegitimate son. Modern feminist retellings continue to latch onto this dark margin. They reject the myth of the perfect, bloodless homecoming, focusing instead on the collateral damage of patriarchal supremacy. The epic's chaotic conclusion is deliberate proof. After 20 years of war, isolation, and wandering, a true return home is impossible.